Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Latitude live stream. For those of you who don't know me, I am Devin. I am our VP of Experience here at Latitude, and I'll be hosting our live stream today. This is an exciting one. We're planning to talk a bit about immersive story, and we're going to be meeting with Nick and Michael, who are on. Nick is our CEO, Michael is our narrative designer. So we'll be talking with both of them today. Quickly before we do that, just need to put my murder machete hatchet away real quick, just so we can, being the murder shed and all, we've got to make sure we get that taken care of. So let's wander over. I think they're waiting for me, so let me go ahead and start wandering over to them. Hey, gentlemen, how you doing?
Hey there. Pretty good. And you?
Not too bad. I'm realizing that I've got the way that I have this set up is poor because I have the comments right over the top of your face right now, Michael. I'm going to move that around for a sec.
Well, they're not missing anything too important.
Well,
Comments are more important.
yeah, comments are great, but we'd like to see you too. So before we get started, maybe we'll just take a second, let you both introduce yourselves a little bit. Maybe Nick, do you want to start for those that don't know you, and then Michael go after that?
Sure, yeah. So I'm Nick. I'm the CEO, co-founder of Latitude. Built the first version of AI Dungeon, as well as the first early prototype of Voyage. Yeah, and I'm super. I especially love like how we integrate like AI and game systems together, and spend a lot of time thinking about that and how to drive really interesting narratives.
Yeah, I'm Michael, and my role is lead narrative director at Latitude, and I've been with the company for about a year and a half. And I'm focused right now on making stories as good as they can be in Voyage. And it's something that I'm passionate about. I'm really passionate about seeing how far we can take AI narrative and AI role playing. I think it's got a really bright future, so I'm excited for this conversation today.
Yeah, awesome. So, for context for the community, I think we've recently kind of clarified just how important it is for that immersive story is for both AI Dungeon and for Voyage. So maybe I'd be curious to hear y'all's kind of feelings. Like, why are stories like why is deep, high quality story so important to text based games like AI Dungeon and Voyage?
Yeah, maybe I'll kick off. So I think first, like, story is such a fundamental human thing, right? Like, we've been telling stories as humans for tens of thousands of years, and they have like a real, like, they have so many different like places of value. They let us imagine another world, imagine other lives, learn from other experiences, have like play and fun. And so, like, I think immersive stories are like such a fundamental human thing. Um, I think that's really like at the heart of the value that like AI Dungeon and Voyage give, both in different ways. Um, is this ability to like really immerse yourself in another world in a way that you've never been able to in past digital experiences. Because the AI can adapt and tell story on the fly, you can feel like these characters actually feel alive and react and respond to your actions. Like you can feel way more immersed in the story because it's not just you picking a few options, it's you actually like deciding what you're doing. And I think that's really cool. And I think Voyage like adds a bunch of features that at first, may seem like, well, it's not like just text story, but actually they deepen the story in a lot of interesting, cool ways. So, for example, having combat and health, right? When you have a companion that can die, suddenly that gives the story stakes in a way that didn't have before, right? So like I've had companions who died as part of like, we went on this adventure for like 6 hours. Like when I had this so I had this adventure where I was like constantly on the run from this like evil void queen and her minions, right? So she's like hunting me and no one will help me. And I eventually find this old, arcanic workshop, and there's this like leftover robot from who's been like here for like 100 years and has gone crazy. And I somehow managed to like it tries to kill me at first, but we get over that initial misunderstanding. And it eventually like, I convince it to join me and it becomes my best friend. Its name is Sentinel Prime. And we have all these like, these like moments where we like are like killing Imperial patrols together, running out in hills, and like we just go through all these adventures and have like these, cute awkward moments where I like try to hug it and it's like robot, like I don't know what to do, kind of like vibe, and really like fun dynamic. But anyways, like we get farthest adventure and we're like up in the north with these like ice tribes, trying to convince them to like fight against the Empire with us. And in this big battle, like Sentinel Prime dies. And like when it hit that moment in the story, and I try to bring Sentinel Prime back, but I can't. And like the AI detected and played sad music, and like I realized this character I'd had this whole experience with was like gone. It made this like story so much more real and emotionally impactful because like there were real stakes, because now like there was a story plot beat moment that mattered to me in a way that is harder to have happen when you can just like easily edit or change it or direct it. And in the future on my other companions, now I knew that like my actions mattered, right? Like if I wasn't smart enough, if I wasn't careful enough, like these characters I would care about could actually die. So like that's just an example of where like, in some games I think the story is like a thin layer on top of the mechanics. But I think in Voyage, in many ways the mechanics serve to make the story deeper and more interesting, right? To give it stakes and like real like consequences that make you care more about what happens in that story.
That's awesome. Yeah, because I like that point because it makes it like if you feel like bad things can happen, like consequences can happen, like suddenly it's like, oh crap, like I can't just like frivolously throw something away and retry. Like I have to be thoughtful and careful and strategic, and that makes. I mean, to your point, Nick, about stories, like part of story is allowing us to kind of embody a character or a different person, like that lets you like truly embody rather than just being kind of like God mode, just moving things around, like and
Yeah.
undoing and changing things. Yeah,
Which can be fun too, to like direct a story, right? But that's a different story experience than to like be a character in the story with real stakes around your actions.
yeah. Michael, what about you? Why do you feel like immersive story is so important to these experiences?
But I think Nick's example is a great way to start this conversation because he touched on a lot of the things that I think are most important to say when we talk about why story is more interesting or at least different in this medium. And I think the main thing that jumped out at me from his story, and I've heard it before, but it's still such a cool story, is that what mattered most to Nick about the experience that he had was that he chose a lot of the actions that he took. And I think choosing how the story unfolds makes the experience much more direct and personal. In a lot of other media where there are great stories, there are stories that happen more to you, right? So you go to the movies and you see a great movie, but it's not a story that you get to choose much about. You only get to choose if you see that movie, or if you leave early, maybe if it's terrible, right? But you don't really get to choose much about the experience. You can't say, no, no, don't go in that room. Don't do that. You don't get to make that choice. And so a lot of the things that happen to the characters don't hit you the same way. And I think that choice is something that is central to the stories in our medium that makes them so much more powerful. And so I think we'll keep coming back to choice because a lot of other principles that are important to keep in mind and to work on making better to make the stories better are all tied to choice. So choice, everything flows from choice, I think.
Totally agree. Uh, Michael, you brought something interesting that I've been thinking about. You mentioned, other media, movies and TV shows. And this is maybe just my own kind of personal anecdote or observation, but it feels like in other mediums, like the importance of storytelling has been somewhat lost or diminished. And I don't want to name names, but there's even some popular franchises that, have had a meteoric rise, and then like in recent years have sort of like fallen off and have lost a lot of their fan bases because they've deviated from the great principles of great storytelling. Um, and I'm curious if either of you have felt the same thing, and I wonder, like, do you feel like there's sort of like a societal hunger for better storytelling that we just don't have right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things, I think more broadly than that, um, in both the games and movie industry, there's a lot of focus on two things. One is like graphical like fidelity. Like the last 10 years, a lot of AAA, it's been this like march towards like better and better graphics, right? And you see that in the movie with kind of like big budget box office things. And I think the other challenge you see is like I think these large businesses in entertainment like obsessing over like predictability, right, in their revenues. Because I think the real like why do they make, series like seven, movies or shows on the same IP? It's because it's a bit more predictable. It's safer. It's the safe bet, right? And same with AAA, right? Like instead of, like the reason they're not making these hit indie games is because it's riskier, right? Like it takes a little bit of risk, and I think great stories also require that, right? Like I think you a safe, predictable story where you're like, this has the perfect formula and it's gonna, do exactly the right beats. Like that's not really what people want because like, people want stories that are different, that give them something new, that give them some, freshness that like the stale predictable thing won't give. And I think, going back to the graphical part, it's like, yes, that's a predictable way to like maybe improve the experience, but I think at the end of the day, like great graphics are always secondary to great story and great gameplay, right? Like I think if you have really great story and gameplay, um, and the graphics support that, then that's great, but they can never be a substitute for having that core, right? Um, and so I think those are some of the ways that people are missing is like there's this over focus on the polish, the veneer, the shallow layer that's easy to market, right? And that's easy to just like scale up a knob on. But I think what people are really hungering for is deep stories and experiences that like move them, right?
Yeah, totally agree. And I think in fairness, like I think even we with AI Dungeon have uh, made a couple little missteps on that in the past too. Like when we implemented images into AI Dungeon, we're like, oh, this will be cool. People can make cool pictures inside of the story, but it didn't. There's a lot of people that use the images, but I think what we didn't get quite right is that it actually takes you out of your story because you have to like pause, you have to go switch and go into C mode, and then you have to think of a prompt, and it sort of actually like takes you out of the story. And I think to your point, Nick, the story has to be first, and like anything that pulls you out of that, whether it's bad writing or over graphics, like it's just not quite the right experience. So I think it's something that we've learned from, and I think we want to apply that lesson to Voyage and also future AI Dungeon.
And if you do two images and like one has a character that looks like one way and the same character looks completely different in another image, that breaks you out of the story too, because you're like, why are these characters suddenly different? Like that's, it's like if an actor changed, like if you change the actor for a character like midway through the movie and you're like, yeah, this is Barb now. You're like, that's not Barb, like that's someone else, like you have to make sure it adds to the immersion, not subtracts from the immersion. Otherwise, it's not adding value.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. Um, so as we think about like, well, it's funny you brought up characters because that's one of the other things I wanted to talk about because um, it seems like we've had some discovery around storytelling with AI, and particularly, I think both of you, in particular, as the team has been working on developing Voyage and thinking about how to use AI systems to develop really deep and compelling story. I think we started with some different hypotheses of how that should come to fruition, and I think some of those experiments worked and some of them didn't. And it feels like we've landed on a couple things around characters and non-linear storytelling, and I'd be curious to hear like how do you think about designing great story in an AI system, and how is that different from traditional linear storytelling?
Yeah, I'll let Michael take the
Yeah,
first out of this.
I guess I could take this one. So I think one place to go back to is the idea of choice being central to stories in this medium, because this is the thing that our medium does better than other media, without a question. Um, in the movie, you don't have a choice. In a book, you don't have a choice. Even if it's a choose your own adventure book, which I loved as a kid, by the way, and which were an inspiration for a lot of us, I think, working on AI Dungeon and Voyage. Even in those books, you don't really have a choice. You just get to go through branching paths. And traditional games are also like that for the most part. Even if it's called an open world game, the plot tree has already been written on a whiteboard somewhere and studied, and the actors have all delivered their lines. It's all canned, and it's beautifully done. The production values, we were just talking about that. It's amazing how good the production values of games have gotten compared to where they started when I was a kid, and it was 8-bit or whatever. So they're amazing now. They're so compelling, but you can't really choose, and you can't really change what happens in the story. And in our medium, you can. Um, and when you think a little bit about what that means, it means that you actually get to have consequences in the story for the characters that you interact with. And if you care about the characters and you're talking directly to them, like Nick was saying, they're talking right to you, uh, you care about what happens to them, like he was caring about his character, the one who got killed in his story. And that happens all the time in this medium. And you care in a way that you don't quite care in other media. And that is so powerful compared to a traditional game. It and everything flows from that, I think, when you're thinking about how to design for that, because a lot of people, I think when they approach this problem, they say, well, we have tools for telling stories that people have used in other media. So why can't we tell a story in this one like people do in the movies? Why can't we do the same structure that they use in the movies? Why can't we plan the story, right? Why can't we know where this is going? Because that is one thing that you feel sometimes in improvisational storytelling. Like, where is this going? And I think we'll probably get back to that question too. Like, how do you have the feeling that something is going somewhere? What does that mean? It does mean something. It's important. But a lot of the time people want to plan, right? And planning in this medium takes away choice, because if you say this is where the story is going, you're essentially creating those rails that exist in other media, that exist in traditional games, and you're locking players into arriving at a particular destination. But one of the amazing things about making content, making stories for this medium, is that you have no idea what's going to happen. And that's really hard, but it's also really powerful. And it makes a lot of interesting challenges that I think we're going to keep talking about in this conversation.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that like Michael touched on is just that like I think one of the solutions to this, right, is to focus less on trying to define a plot, right? Because the problem with defining the plot as like, the developers or as the engine is the plot assumes you know what all the characters will do. And the problem with us is like we don't know what the most important characters in the game are going to do, and that's you. That's the player, right? Like the player is the most important character, and if you can't know what the main character is going to do, how are you going to know exactly where the story is going to go, right? And so I think what we think about then is like, okay, if we can't define exactly where it's going to go, how do we, you know, we take a lot of inspiration from things like Dwarf Fortress and RimWorld that have these emergent stories that arise out of the interactions of many characters and systems together, right? So can we create systems that out of which emerge really interesting, surprising stories that we never would have expected, right? Can we create characters that really want something or have very unique drives and personalities and hidden backstories and have that interact with our player character and have those, result in some interesting plot line where you have to like, go on a quest to help this character, etc. Like just yesterday I was playing in a play test, a multiplayer play test with some friends, and we started with there's these trolls that were like, captured us. We ran away from them, and this halfling was like, I know where this sunken treasure is in this like dwarf king's thing, and we're like, okay, let's go follow him and help find this treasure. So we go through this thing. One of the trolls follows us. We kills it. We like get through this. We managed to figure out how to go through this like sunken passage, and we finally get there. And there's this like dwarf king, and he just starts like delivering these hilarious lines. Like he's completely not what we expected. He's like super lazy. He's like, ugh, man, who's like disturbing my like, my like, can a guy get some eternal king's like treasure chamber slumber around here? Like he's like delivering all these like super sassy like lines, and it's cool because like I was like, why is he so funny? Like, is this the AI just riffing? And like, there's an element of the AI riffing taking directions, but I went down into our state and realized it was the character system, like which Michael's done a lot of work on. And the character system had all these personality traits around like him just being like super lazy and like always wanting to just like have this comfortable life and like being sassy. And it's just like, it was this system that drove, especially around characters, this really compelling storyline that we all like enjoyed and have had like a fun time with. Um, that resulted in a more interesting story than if we had tried to like plan out exactly what's going to happen in this moment. And it was surprising, right? Like I didn't expect this. I think if you did the standard cliche story arc, it'd be like, okay, and here's this treasure, and there's a big bad boss, and we have to fight the boss, and it's just like a very standard thing. And because it was this dynamic emergent system, it was very surprising. Like I didn't get there and expect to find this like dwarf king who's just like not offended we're here for the gold, but he's just kind of annoyed because he's like taking a nap, right? It's a unique, fresh story that's like surprising and interesting in a way that like I think you don't always get nowadays when everyone is trying to just follow like the rigid exact plot. And then we got to play around with that, right? Now we get to be like, okay, how do we deal with this like sassy dwarf king? Like, can we negotiate in an interesting way? Do we just fight him? Like, we get to Michael's point, we get that choice that now shapes the story in all kinds of interesting ways. Like we can take that in any direction. Maybe we convince him to join our party. Like how fun would it be to have like a sassy ghost king like coming around with you, like complaining and whining all the time about like the way you forced him to help you like solve some other quest, right? Like there's so many directions it could go, and like you get the power and the creative freedom to like decide like where is this story going to go and what's going to be interesting about it.
Well, in some ways, what's interesting about that is it sort of emulates real life, because life generates stories. We all have stories in our own lives, but nobody's like writing the plot for our story. How do stories happen in real life? It's each of us has our own different characteristics and traits and skills, but also like motivations and goals and backstories. And as we kind of interact with each other, all kind of going about our lives, there's conflict and there's collaboration and there's love and there's all this emotion, and stories just, I love the word that you used, Nick, emerge out of all of these kind of entities coming together in a way that creates the stories of our own lives. And so it sounds like what you're saying, that with Voyage, it follows a very similar pattern where rather than having a very plot driven story, we're letting the stories emerge through characters and through the world itself. I mean, because the world is also a character, really, right? Because locations matter and things like that. So, like, given that that's true, I think it puts a lot of emphasis on character depth, location depth, world depth. How do you, like, as you think about building this system with great characters and great world, like, how do you make sure that those elements have the appropriate sort of characteristics? And I've used the depth so many times it should be a drinking game at this point, but how do you make sure that those things have enough depth that they can create these interesting stories that you're talking about?
I'll do a quick, yeah, unless you want to go, Michael.
No, I was just waiting to see if you wanted to take this one first, but I have lots to say, so
I'll do a quick version, and then I'm sure Michael can expand a ton on it, and share some other insights. But one of the things like we're really inspired by is I think Lord of the Rings is this world that J.R.R. Tolkien created that a lot of people have fallen in love with. And why have they done that? And I think one of the reasons is, like you mentioned, Devin, this like the depth of the world. And you read Lord of the Rings, and while you read so much on the page, you can see, you can feel, you can sense that there's so much that's not on the page about this world, right? He like drops these references to things and he like has these poems of these long past people. And the reality is like he did create so much. Like he created an entire world and then wrote a story within it in a way that makes you really feel like the world's there. So that's this principle of like narrative depth that I think you're alluding to. And what's powerful is like we sort of uses the iceberg narrative principle. Like you want to feel like what you see is just the tip of the iceberg for what feels like it exists in the world, right? And the problem with sort of like naive have ChatGPT tell a story is that the entire iceberg is like ice floating on the surface of the water. Like there is no underlying iceberg, right? It's just like some ice floating on top. And you start to feel that after a while. Like you sense that like, oh, the AI is just improving everything. Everything's made up on the fly. There's no real like depth here, right? The characters are just like the lines they've delivered, like there's not this like underlying, there's no opportunity for secrets, right? So in Voyage, actually like there is, you know, a ton of narrative content that's created that both by creators and on the fly by the AI that you may never see and you may never even know about, but it bubbles up in this like story in a way that surprises you, right? Like an example of that is the king, right? The king having this deep, rich backstory and like he has this his own like hidden info around like who he is and what he wants and like the AI is not just going to say that. It's like it's all this stuff that motivates it, and you can sense there's more underneath, but you have to really like dig and explore. So in that same story where I had Sentinel Prime the robot, where I had one other companion that was this like Void Crow that I met, and the Void Crow would just like throughout the whole course of my adventure, like going to fight the Void Queen, he just like drop these little like nuggets of hints of like referencing things. There's like, what is he talking about? He'd reference this like slight thing with the Void Queen. He'd reference like something about who he is. And like I didn't really understand. And then after we defeated the Void Queen, I started asking him, and he revealed that like he was actually this like manifestation of this giant like entity in the void who the queen had crippled, and he had been trying to find someone to help take her down. And I was like, oh my gosh, because all the little pieces connected and tied into that. And because that was actually defined when I first met him. Like that was in his character. I checked, it was in his character blob, but I didn't know about it because it was that underneath iceberg that he dropped little hints all along the story. So when he had the big reveal, it was like, whoa. And it was cool and it felt so real because I could see the way all the dots connected, right? I could see the way the hooks were planted, the seeds were planted from early on in the story. And you need the iceberg to really like deliver on that because AI is not going to do that, and it's not going to do it in a consistent way
Yeah, and
without systems.
well, and Michael, before you comment, like I just want to call out a comment from the chat. Someone, kind of said, "Oh, so like imagine like the AI in the background letting the world kind of continue the simulation and characters doing other things." Because I think that adds to the realism that you're talking about, Nick, where it's like you're part of a world where ironically like it feels cooler like that the world could almost exist without you, right? That
Yeah.
that like it's a real place and things could happen and shift and change even if you weren't there.
And one more story on that. So I'll say like in terms of like living world, we still have a lot to go for living when you're not there. Like I think we have a lot of ambitions that like is still like, we haven't fully gotten to realize yet. But there's some ways it's there already. So like one really cool experience I had was I like started in this tavern and immediately these thugs come in and they're like start threatening the ship captain, and they're like, gonna beat him up. And the bartender comes up and she's like defending the ship captain. She's like got her hand on her sword. She's like, what are you doing threatening, my patron? And I just like nope out of there. I'm like, I'm not gonna deal with this. Like I'm not involved. So I like walk down the street, and as I walk down the street, I can hear like them start drawing swords and start fighting, right? And so like I walk farther down the street and I end up at this like baker's house, and I'm like chilling, just investigating their goods for a little bit. And then suddenly these guards rush past and they're like, murder at the Drunken Sailor Inn. And the person murdered was the ship captain, and it was murdered by the no, sorry, it wasn't the ship captain, it was the thug leader. The thug leader was murdered by the bartender. And like that actually happened in the simulation behind the scenes and then showed up in the story. So then I went on this whole plot line where I went to the guards and I was like, wait, I saw this altercation happen. I can be a witness. But then they were mad because like the thug captain was actually a friend of the guard captain. And so they like tried to intimidate me to change my story, and they were like beating me up and like threatening me with imprisonment. And then the magistrate like burst in and it was like, this is a violation of, you know, justice. And so it was like, it was so funny because it was this whole plot line that's extended from me ignoring the plot line, but then deciding to engage in it in a completely different way as like a witness to it. And so it just was really cool the way that like, the world felt alive and I was able to engage with it even when I wasn't there. And we still have a lot more to go on that, but there's some cool seeds of that already that are showing really cool fruit.
That's awesome. Yeah, Michael, over to you. Like, again, kind of thinking about like depth of characters and depth of world, especially kind of in these AI systems. And we probably should have mentioned this at the beginning, but like people may not know that you're one of the top creators on AI Dungeon, as Wandering Star. So like I think you in particular have a really intimate sense of like how do you create that depth in AI systems where you want it to give just enough information but not too much. Like how do you think about the depth of characters and locations with these AI systems that we're making?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question and a very delicate balance. Because the technology we're using wasn't designed for this, it wasn't designed for storytelling, it was designed for being an assistant, pretty much. Um, it wants to just tell us the answer to everything right away. And that's the opposite of storytelling in a lot of ways. A storyteller plans all these things out, and then doesn't tell you, makes you wonder, right? Makes you ask questions, but doesn't give you the answers right away. And that's suspense, right? That's how you create suspense in a story. You create anticipation of this answer, but you don't actually give the answer right away. And so our problem with language models is they actually want to give us the answer. So if you say this is a murder mystery, sometimes the murder is resolved right away. It's like, oh, the guy, he's right there. He did it. And I'm just being helpful as the AI. That's what you wanted, right? You wanted a murder mystery. That's the answer. He's over there. So it wants to go right to the answer. So it goes from the question to the answer. So when we design these systems, we have to be very careful to design them in such a way that we don't let it go right to the answer. And so a lot of the time, it's an exercise in making sure that the content that's generated doesn't have the right answer in it. It just has questions. So you create a world that's full of actors who might be characters or might be locations, they might be factions, and they all ask questions, right? So one question could just be like the tavern scene. Who's gonna have the best of this situation, right? Who's right? Who's wrong? Who's strongest? These are all questions that they're asking each other. And we don't tell the AI the answer before, right? We don't say that the thugs are stronger than the ship captain or the bartender will never intervene, right? We give the bartender characteristics that say the bartender stands up for weaker people or people who are being threatened. And then we give the thugs characteristics that say they will do this and that. But again, this goes back to the planning idea. If we planned this story out in advance, we said the thugs are going to come in and they're going to threaten the captain and the bartender is going to intervene. And the player then has to, stop the murder from happening, right? Or the only other thing they can do is fight the thugs, right? Then suddenly, we've got a story that doesn't give us the choice that we wanted. And so instead we create actors that have motivations, they have principles that sustain them. So the captain wants this, he doesn't want that. He had this happen to him before. And so those things all act together. And the AI can bring those characters to life in a way that's very engaging because it's extremely good at the short-term engagement, bringing people, like playing people in the short term. And that way it can't do the thing where it wants to just answer the question, like, this is what's going to happen in this story. Like, this is a murder mystery and it's over now. So thanks for playing. So that's one aspect of it. And the depth is just so important. And that's why I think the focus of the company and the platform is also on creators, because I think humans have a really important role to play in creating that depth. So we work really hard on systems that create this depth, but then people come in And they also create these great narrative systems that create really amazing stories by helping the systems work even better, by filling them with things that ask these great questions. How is this going to turn out? And so that's one of the things that we're really focused on, and I'm focused on, is empowering people to use the technology to create things that tell great stories that none of us can anticipate how they're going to turn out.
Yeah, well, and that's actually, oh, sorry. Like you also bring up kind of another interesting point just around the limitations of language models in general and their inability to really deliver on that depth. And to your point, like they're overly helpful and they kind of resolve things too quickly. But I'd be curious to kind of hear even just a little bit more like why can't, just standard vanilla language models create great immersive storytelling? Why like I think there's some technical limitations around, why they're just not set up to do that. I mean, to your point, Michael, I mean, you kind of said like, why can't ChatGPT make these great stories? What kind of prevents them from doing that? What are we working around with AI, and why is getting this right so hard?
Yeah. Did you want to say something? Go ahead. Sorry, Nick.
Oh, I'll add one piece, which is like, I think one piece is that AI is still AI is very good at short-term tasks, like short timeline tasks, right? Like we can get AI to code something that would take 30 minutes, and do it like quite well. But it's very, very poor at long-term tasks. So we see that in narrative as well, where like AI is really great at writing a scene, right? But it's not so good at writing a whole novel, right? Because it's not as good at these long-term tasks. Like the longer it goes, the harder it is to be successful. So that's piece number one. I think another piece is due to the way a lot of the AI models are trained, it depends on the AI model. So some are better at this than others, but a lot of AI models have they go through a process called ROHF. And what that does is it takes the pre-trained models that are trained on the internet have a very wide distribution and can do very crazy random things, right? And sometimes that's really fun, but also it's frustrating because then it might not listen to instructions, it might do something weird, and so there's like this trade-off. So a lot of modern models are really like trained down to do the most expected thing, the most like clear answer, right? Because they want to win at the benchmarks. And the problem with that is then you get things that are more cliche, more expected, right? And so you've got this like trade-off between those two things. And I think the third thing I'll add is like, I think even humans, if you're writing a full novel, you often don't do it just by pure like word, right? There's this process where you're sort of like you're running more complex systems than that in your head. You're not just like writing the next word, you're thinking about, who are these characters and what do they want and like what is this world and what are the promises I'm going to set up? And like you have this whole like kind of structure you're thinking about the story from that models just don't do by themselves. So I think those are all some of the reasons. Like even humans, I think if you ask them to be, sit at the other end of AI Dungeon and just like write constantly, like I think, unless they have the opportunity to think really carefully about a long-term story and do a lot of other extra thinking, like they're probably not going to do significantly better at just this pure improvisational storytelling than an AI might do. So I think you need a lot more than just improv, is maybe one of the things I'm saying.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I think I would just go even further and say that you probably can't tell the kind of story that we associate with the word story when we're talking about like a well-told, artful story by improvising, especially not when there's someone else in the room who is constantly getting in the way, the player, right? So imagine you're the AI and you're trying to tell the perfect story and the player's saying, nope, we're going over there. I'm not going over where you wanted to go. Like I have a story planned out. I'm the AI. I'm a genius AI. I have a great story. And the player says, no way, I'm going to do this. And then so constantly having to adapt to what this other part of the system is doing. And I think what that brings out is that a story in this medium is actually quite different from a story in movie, which we touched on before. And not to belabor that point too much, but what I think this means is that we shouldn't hold these stories to the same type of standard. And the standard that we should hold them to really flows from the choice and the consequence and the moment to moment, and then also remembering, which is what we touched on before. So instead of planning, the most important thing is that you remember, because what we care about in these stories is affecting the characters that mean something to us, whether we help them or we harm them because we oppose them. So they're bad guys, and we really don't want them to get what they want. And Nick mentioned that you can lose in this game. This game can say game over, and the bad guys, they won this time, right? Which it isn't something that you get told to you a lot in a lot of other media, but this one can say they won, right? And now what are you going to do about it, right? You can continue the story after the bad guys get their way. And so I think that really gets to the core of choice, just flowing through all of the principles that are so crucial to this medium.
Yeah. And maybe I could just double click a little bit, because it's like, I think both of you kind of alluded to this. But it sounds like, I mean, Michael, you kind of talked about like the importance of helping the AI remember, um, and then also sort of like the ability to. It also sounds like it's like remembering and structure almost sound like two of these pillars that help us guide the AI to generate these great emergent stories. And I wonder if you guys could just elaborate a little bit on like the structural systems that are in place that help us create the great stories. Because even AI Dungeon has a lot more structure and tools in place to help the AI remember. You know, there's story cards and there's plot essentials, and there's things that we do that help keep the AI on track. And I think Voyage takes that to a whole nother level. And I'd be curious, we don't have to, get down to the code level, obviously, but I'd be curious to hear just a little bit about like some of those systems and how they help make the story great.
Yeah, it's a great question. So this is one of the things I think we discovered very early on in Voyage's development is critical to having the experience be able to be fun beyond an hour or two. Because, we've talked about narrative immersion and we've talked about choices and consequences that matter, right? And all of those, if the AI forgets key things, like it breaks all of those, right? Because if the AI forgets this important choice you made and its impact, then like suddenly your choice doesn't matter, right? So that kicks the leg out from under that. If there's like this really important thing that like is suddenly forgotten, then that breaks immersion in the story. So getting a really great memory system was one of our like very early on objectives, and we've done a lot of refining on it. Um, and there's three parts to that memory system that make it really good. And we've heard from like players that like the memory system is often so good they like can't detect flaws. Um, and not to say that there aren't. Like it can misremember things, but its memory like often feels on the par with like a human, or maybe slightly better depending on like what aspect of the memory. And the way we built the memory is very much modeling it off of like everything a dungeon master might need to remember what's in the plot and story. So there are three main pieces to that. The first is like hierarchical summarization. So that's this idea that you remember better what happened in the last hour than you do the last day, week, month, year. And so you have this sort of like triangle of like how granular you remember things based on recency. And so we do the same thing in Voyage. So we summarize the story, and as summaries is the summary section fills up, we summarize the oldest ones into a higher tier summary, and then we do that so on and so forth. And actually we can keep all that summary under 5,000 6,000 tokens of context, and it always has the full like arc of your story in its brain, even if it doesn't have the lowest level of details. The second piece of our memory system is a retrieval based memory system. So RAG is something that's commonly used in AI. So we store memories, we retrieve them based on semantic context, and then throw that in the story. And the third one, so those two are the two that I think humans really have. Is like humans have both those, and humans have a few other more sophisticated things. Like we have sort of like memory poignance, right? Like things that are really core, like we have core memories, right? And like we've maybe a little bit more sophisticated versions of that, but they're kind of like variations on compression and retrieval. Um, and then the third that we have that as humans we use external systems for is like a discrete state, right? So Dungeon Master might have a character sheet, right? Where he's like making notes, he's like marking the health down, he's like, this is a location, this location is these characters have these properties. Like they have their whole like notebook so that they can remember things in like great detail. And we have like the complex systems that let us do things like combat simulation, exploring a world, having, you know, characters and inventory and other things show up in the UI. Um, those all also enable us to have a much more compelling memory system because now, you know, whenever you're in a location, every other character that's there, we're including all the info about that, right? So it's like a really intelligent story card that knows exactly like which characters, which locations are relevant at this moment and is constantly tracking those and updating aspects of them so that, you know, we're keeping track of especially the most important things because the most important things in the story like the locations, the characters, the items, and how those all play into each other. And so the combination of those three systems does a ton to make the memory feel way better than in something like AI Dungeon.
And what, since you're on the subject of AI Dungeon, there have been a few chats discussing the well, let's call it some of the recent struggles of the memory system in AI Dungeon. I just want to kind of clarify. You're talking about the Voyage memory system, which I think is superior, and in a lot of ways. And like maybe it might be worth even just mentioning some of the differences between the AI Dungeon and Voyage engine specifically. And if you want, you could throw in a plug or two about how we've recently fixed some of the AI Dungeon and Voyage, or sorry, the AI Dungeon issues with memories and summarization that people may not be aware of, because that's been some of a
Yeah.
recent fix.
Yeah, so the AI Dungeon memory system was inspired by Voyages. So we have two of those three elements in AI Dungeon represented. One of them had some issues. The retrieval side on AI Dungeon, we recently fixed a lot of those, so that's working a lot better than it was. There were some model changes and stuff that like made it perform worse from when it was first built, and now we've resolved those. The compression side is one we're still working on improving on AI Dungeon. I think there's some issues with it. One of the challenges was it's the compression is much less sophisticated than in Voyage in AI Dungeon, and that's partly due to some constraints. Where in AI Dungeon you can edit things, and that means like you can't like it's much harder to have like this like you know well structured you know hierarchical summary system when the player can edit things that have happened in the past. So there's those are where we've had to make some trade-offs and not be able to do some of the same things in AI Dungeon that we have on Voyage. And then the third thing AI Dungeon doesn't have at all. Like there is no like NPC location item tracking system. And that's like a huge part of what helps, you know, memory, you know, stay super consistent in Voyage. And those are things that I think will make Voyage really strong on the memory side.
Yeah, and it seems like some of those systems too, like that, those states that, like when people ask about things like inventory and health and stuff, I mean, like they're more than just like game mechanics in terms of like, ooh, I like seeing a cool number go up and down, but it also helps add structure to the story. You know, Michael was talking about remembering and structure. They also add kind of structure to the narrative as well, right? Not just memory.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, they help better story immersion because it doesn't break memory and you can create some interesting like you can create some interesting narrative hooks, right? Like you can get an item that has like I remember one time I was adventuring and I was in this like druidic forest marketplace type place and this tree ant like walks up to me and just hands me this like magical glowing acorn and I'm like, "What the heck is this?" And it has like this like mysterious like description on it and suddenly all these like people come up to me and they start like haggling with me and they get into this like bidding war against each other because they really want the acorn. And it's like that's an example of where like this item system drove interesting story immersion, right? And then also they add gameplay elements where you can use the items to be more effective in your game. And then you know you can surface that via UX and like visually understand like what's happening a lot better. So I think it's those systems help with all those elements that help you feel like more immersed and feel like your experience is more compelling. I'll let
Yeah, absolutely.
Michael speak more. Like, are there other things I missed on the memory system or some of these aspects?
Oh no, I don't think we missed things. There's just so much to talk about with this one because I think memory is integral to having stories feel like there's a payoff, and that's what we talked about for and paused on. And I think we have all heard a lot of stories that don't have a payoff. You know, like when someone tells you a story that doesn't go anywhere, and you're like, "Why are you telling me this? You told me a bunch of stuff that I don't care about. What's the punchline, right, to your story? What's the point?" And sometimes with AI, stories don't seem to have a point. And one of the reasons they don't have a point is because the language model has a context window that's limited and it actually forgets what it was talking about at the beginning. Maybe it was building towards something somehow, but it forgot about that. And so the memory system is really important for that because if you can capture what's important to what's happened before, the model can sometimes create what are called a callback, right? A callback is when later in a story something happens that reminds you of something that happened before. So like the Void Crow is a good example. The Void Crow, it seemed like actually when you think about it, like it had been dropping hints the whole time, right? That like it had been planned. But the interesting thing is that it wasn't planned. I mean, the character object was created, so it had principles that made it act in a certain way. But there wasn't actually any planning that that callback would mean anything, that there would be a poignant scene where Nick realized that this creature was actually part of a greater entity and had this big, mission that had gone on and it accomplished its goal. And that's possible because the memory system, when you create a character, if you know what's important about characters, what probably will matter if they end up being important in the story, and you can do that with all of the actors in the story, so not just that character, but all of them, and the locations and the factions, and you can remember how they've all interacted in the past, then suddenly, when one of these things happens, it's like it was planned. But it's better than if it was planned because you as the player had the full choice to get to this point. And so you care more what happened to this character. And so suddenly this reveal that it was, doing this plan the whole time means so much more to you. And all of that is possible because of the memory that allows us to create emergent structures that are like planned stories and that don't constrain player choice in the way that if we had tried to railroad you onto a story where we're like, the most important thing is that in an hour, the Void Crow tells us that it was part of it. And it's like, that's never going to happen. But if we design all the systems in this way and we make sure that everything's remembered, then these moments become possible, right?
Yeah, and I think it kind of touches on something that is one of the powers of this engine and medium is that like if you're pre-creating a set of paths, right, as a developer, like you may be able to find something people care about, or you may not. Like you may as a player discover some character you think is really interesting or cool, or some plot thread that you'd love to go on, but like the developers didn't imagine that, so it's like it's just locked. Like there's nothing that's going to happen down that path, right? But because with this engine, it's like dynamically creating things on the fly. Um, it can really create personalized to what you really care about and find interesting, right? So like if you're like, I don't care about this whole like thug, Captain Brawl, you can choose to completely ignore it. And if you say, oh, but I'm actually really interested in like, what if I'm the witness to a crime? Like that's a different story that now I've shown interested in, and the AI can be like, oh, you're interested in the witness to a crime plot? Cool. Well, like I'm gonna take you all the way down that like adventure, right? And so you as a player get just so much more personalization in terms of the stories you're interested in than you do in like traditional experiences.
Yeah. Well, so this is my completely unbiased opinion, but it seems to me that Voyage kind of represents the future of AI-driven storytelling games. I mean, this is going to be the first like truly emergent AI-driven RPG experience. I mean, it's going to be incredible. And there's been a few questions about when it's coming more broadly. Nick, I don't know if do you want to answer when we anticipate that happening?
Yeah, so we are in closed beta right now, and we are adding more and more people every month to it, and so it's been really fun seeing the beta testers come in. Overall, the reaction has been extremely positive. Like a lot of people have really felt the magic around this. There's still like, issues that we're improving, like getting the AI systems more accurate and reliable so they don't create mistakes that break immersion. There's still areas of the UX that we're polishing and refining, but overall, like the core magic is really strong and there, and we're mostly kind of getting everything to work more polished and more consistently. In terms of like when we're gonna open up for public access, we don't have a hard date, but we are targeting sometime in the first half of next year. And I think we'll be able to we'll be most likely able to hit in that. I don't know exactly what month that'll be because we've got to make sure it's ready. That's more important than sort of pushing it out a little too early. But that's what we're looking at.
So maybe kind of like a final question for both of you. So Voyage is going to be like the greatest kind of version of this AI driven narrative. But what comes next? After we kind of go to public access in the first half of next year, where does Voyage and AI driven world creation kind of go next?
Yeah. I'll speak on one aspect, and we will need to figure out like how we sequence things and prioritize things. But one area that we're really interested in is how do we make these worlds and how do we make the experience more multiplayer and enable more interesting ways to like create and live in worlds with others and with your friends. Because Voyage is the first time like we've done experience where like I think the multiplayer is in many ways more fun than the single player. Like we've all played multiplayer games together and had like a real blast doing it. And it's a really fun experience. And so I think, exploring things like do we make it easier for you to find and jump into multiplayer games with other people on the platform, like make new friends with people. If you both love gritty like Western, experiences, you can make friends who also do that and play in games together. So I think that's one. And then more ambitiously, right now we're sort of locked to 4 to 6 people in a party, and you have to all stick together. But I think we could get to the point where, you can all live in the same world and not necessarily have to be next to each other, right? Like maybe you're off, in this city doing this quest, your friends over here, you meet back up in this area. So moving towards like a Minecraft model where there's maybe hundreds of people in the same world, all doing interesting things together. I think those are some of the directions we want to go. Maybe Michael, you can speak. I know we've had a lot on like living worlds that we're also interested in exploring.
Yeah, I think that's a nice tie-in to what you were talking about. That's one of the things that I've thought about a lot, and sort of the daydreamy part of the job where I think, what could we do that's really crazy with this technology? What will people be able to do with it? And I think that's exactly right. Making a living world, a world where everything continues and has a life of its own, and the world is full of actors, like we were talking about before, that make stories for you to interact with or to ignore or to make your own. And I think we could talk for a whole nother hour about what that might be like, but the possibilities are really exciting. And so it's just such a treat to be working on this game right now, because I think we're at a point where we have so many different exciting things to try with this technology. And the stories that it tells are already amazing, and they're just going to get better, I think. So
Yeah.
I can't wait to see everyone in Larian, basically.
Yeah. Well, and more broadly, like I think, like because in many, in some ways we're making an engine, right? But like I think the bigger thing that we're especially excited about is like the platform nature, right? And having everyone in there creating their own worlds because there's so much like I think we like making the experiences. I think we can be creative, and I think Michael has done a lot of great work on. We have sort of a default, example world that's super fun to play. But I fully expect in the long term, like all of you will create worlds that like blow us away. And so I think that's one thing that I'm also really excited about is the way in which it's going to unlock creativity from so many people and to make things that we would have never expected, right? To create ideas and stories and worlds that like, that I can jump into and play and be delighted by. So I think that's going to be really cool to see.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, maybe on a future live stream we should also talk about some of the really cool creator tools for Voyage. Because I think one thing that's really cool about Voyage is it lets even kind of people like me that are not the best creators. I am no wandering star. I haven't disclosed my secret creator accounts on AI Dungeon, but I will say they're nowhere near what Michael has created. But like on Voyage, I've been able to make some really cool stuff. And to your point, Nick, like I think that means that there's going to be so many kind of exciting worlds for people to try out and explore, whether they're making them on their own or discovering what other people make. It's going to be a lot of fun. Any other kind of final thoughts before we wrap up our live stream from either of you?
No, I'm just excited. I think I think maybe my last thought I'll share is I think Voyage is a really exciting step in the direction that we've always dreamed of as a company. So, ever since we made the first version of AI Dungeon, we dreamed of making these kind of experiences. So Voyage is very much the culmination of like 6 years of dreaming of what we'd want to build. And still I think it's just another step on the journey, because I think as a company, like, we really care, and we're very inspired by what kind of experiences can we enable to be created in the future that were never possible before. What experiences have people dreamed of playing, and the worlds they've dreamed of being in that we could never do with the technology. And I think we're still really early in the journey. Like, I think Voyage is going to be a massive step forward and enable so much. And we're still going to be thinking about how do we push this all the way to the places that I think so many people have dreamed of. And whether that's like getting all the way to like the 3D version of Voyage, where you can jump in any world and have these rich evolving these stories with characters. And I think we'll get there. And so I think this is going to be the next massive step, and be really exciting and pushing forward both our company and the broader industry. Because I think this is going to provide a new thing for people to reference and be inspired by, and I'm really excited to see where that goes.
Very cool. Well, thanks both of you for joining the live stream. It was great to have this discussion. So appreciate you helping out with that. But we'll let you both get back to your day.
All right.
Thanks,
awesome.
Thank you.
See you later.
We'll see you.
Hey, guys.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for participating in the live stream. I hope it was as interesting to you all as it was for me. I think Nick and Michael are both some of the most unique experts in this space of AI-driven storytelling and creating these game systems with AI that are AI native and allow people to have deep immersive stories. So really, really cool. Obviously, we're very much looking forward to Voyage launching first half of next year. And really appreciate everyone for participating in the live stream today. If there's any other questions or comments or feedback, feel free to jump into our Discord or our Reddit, or send us an email at support@aidungeon.com. But yeah, we'll happy to answer any questions, and please give us give us feedback. If you tell us if you're liking these live streams, tell us if there's other ideas of things that you want us to share. We're happy to hear feedback and trying to do better. And sorry, I apologize for letting the machete slip out. When you work out of a murder shed, those things just kind of happen. So that's just kind of comes with the nature of where I work. So cool. Well, thanks everyone, and we'll see you on the next live.